everyone, and welcome back to my Warhammer 40k guides. I am Brady, and today I will be talking about why soup armies and the detachment system is healthy for the game, and why I enjoy list building in 8th edition so much more than 7th edition. I've noticed a lot of people are very vocal about how they don't like the way lists can be built in 8th edition. In particular, they don't like soup armies or detachments. Now, for those of you who don't know what a soup army or detachment is, it's when you use a very broad keyword like Imperium and make a detachment or army out of any units that include that keyword. An example would be using a battalion detachment of Astra Militarum with a spearhead detachment of Ultramarines and a Supreme Command detachment of Inquisitors. All of the units in those sub-factions also share the Imperium keyword, so they can all be played together in one army list. A lot of people don't like this because they think it hurts diversity of the game, and they also think it's not very fluffy or narrative. I disagree with both of those statements, and so, in this video, my goal is to express my opinions on the matter to hopefully help you guys understand why I feel this way and why I think the game is good in its current state. First, let's talk about the narrative side of things. And if you have been watching my videos, you've probably heard me say many times that I care not for the narrative part of this game. I play this game because of the cool sci-fi miniatures and my competitive nature. I have never read any of the lore or fluff in any of my codexes, and I have never read any of the 40k novels. With that said, take this part of my opinion with a grain of salt, and please let me know if I misspeak. But the way I look at it, any legal army can be explained narratively with a little bit of creativity. For example, let's say someone played an Imperium army consisting of Blood Angels and Dark Angels. Maybe the quote-unquote higher-ups, whoever they may be, I'm assuming people that are very close to the Emperor, gave them missions to go fight Xenos on some distant planet, and the two forces of each army happen to arrive on the scene at the same time. And because there's enemies right there in front of them, their first instance, or the first thing that they want to do, of course, is to kill the Xenos that's in front of them. Or, for the more soupier armies where there's stuff like Guilliman with Celestine and Greyfax and some guardsmen and whatnot, again, this can be completely narrative. From what I've heard, weren't all these guys together when fighting on Cadia before it was taken over by Chaos? They all have a common goal, which is usually to fend off Chaos, so why wouldn't they help each other? I could go on all day with creative reasons for why these armies could make sense from a narrative point of view, but there really isn't any point. Just in my opinion, if you're creative enough, almost any army can have some narrative or fluff behind it. Now let's get into the part that really matters, and that's the balance of competitive play. I firmly believe soup armies are healthy for the game and promote a lot of model diversity. If we still had the army building system from 7th edition and list building wasn't how it is today, the top armies of each tournament would most likely be the same armies every time with the exact same models every time. And with the addition of command points and stratagems, this problem would become worse if stuck with mono factions, and I'll explain why. Some armies like Grey Knights and Deathwatch have a hard time creating a viable competitive list while also maintaining a good amount of command points to use on stratagems, while other armies like Guard and Eldar have zero problems with this, since it's easy for them to pump out 2 battalions or even a brigade that are filled with optimal units. So they're not really sacrificing anything to gain the utility from command points. They get their firepower and they get their command points. Whereas with Grey Knights, it's one or the other. You're either taking the best firepower possible with 0 command points, or you're taking a bunch of command points with not really that many great units to spend the command points on. Some armies like Grey Knights have a big and apparent flaws like their points cost and low model count. And without allies, there are 0 ways to fix this. So what I'm trying to hint at here is that some armies have very glaring weaknesses, while others like Eldar and Guard don't really have any weaknesses when played on their own. This means in a competitive setting, the armies with less problems will always be the armies that the competitive players flock to and start using non-stop, since there is no way to fix the problems from other armies if you're forced to play mono faction. If you don't remember 7th edition, it was the same couple of armies that dominated the competitive scene for a very long time. But in 8th, we've already seen the meta shift 4 or 5 times. It could be argued that it's because 8th is new and codexes are still being released, and I would agree that is part of it, but I really do believe soup armies are a huge part of the diversity on the top tables as well. Grey Knights have actually hit the top tables despite all of their flaws, and that's because they were able to ally in Astra Militarum to cover those weaknesses. And because of the flexibility of list building, we see all kinds of different lists from the same armies, because people can pick and choose which units best suit their needs, and everyone's playstyle is different. And because they have more than one codex to pick from, you get some really cool and unique armies. Another thing that some people are mad at and want changed is the fact that some armies bring detachments of Guard just to farm up command points to then use on their other detachments like Grey Knights or Custodes. So some people would like to say that any command point that you get from a specific detachment should only be used on that detachment. Meaning if you brought a battalion of guard and got 3 command points for that, and you brought a vanguard of blood angels, then the 3 command points would only be allowed to be spent on Astra Militarum, and that 1 command point would only be allowed to be spent on blood angels. And I'm assuming the 3 you get for a Battleforged army would just go anyway. This doesn't work because first off, that's too much bookkeeping. It's just, the less bookkeeping, the better for the game, to just keep it simple and for everyone to have fun. But then also, because some armies have a very hard time making a viable list that gets command points. Like I mentioned earlier, with Grey Knights, if you want at least a few command points, you're sacrificing a lot of hitting power just for the utility of command points. But then if you want to change it out and have a bunch of hitting power, well then you don't have any command points to use. So it's kind of like, it's a really weird balancing act. But with allies, this isn't a problem because again, you can ally in an army or a detachment of an army that happens to make up for this or can farm you the command points to spend on your better units. If it was the case where you could only spend command points on the detachment that gained those, then I really do think you would never see Grey Knights or Custodes hit the top tables. Those armies would just not have a viable chance in competitive because they have huge flaws in the rules. Being expensive elite units is the main one, with no way to fix these flaws. If you're forced to only be able to use CP on the detachment that gained the CP, then again elite armies would become completely obsolete because they just wouldn't have all the tools needed to win, while other armies like Eldar and Astra Militarum have everything they needed just by themselves. What a lot of people don't realize when they say they want these rules to be a thing is that it would honestly alienate a good chunk of armies, basically every elite army. If these rules were a thing and you traveled to a tournament like the Las Vegas Open with your Grey Knight or pure Custode list, you might do fine in the first couple of rounds, but once you get to the die-hard competitive players who always bring the most optimized list, you're going to constantly lose out to Eldar and Astra Militarum all the time because they just have so many better tools to work with as a mono faction. Overall, to quickly sum this up, changing the rules to only allow mono factions, or even changing how command points work, would absolutely ruin the chances some armies have of being competitive. So believe it or not, we actually have much more diversity in the top list for tournaments because of soup armies and detachments. If we didn't have soup armies, be prepared to only ever see Eldar and Astra Militarum on the top tables until we get some new codexes like, I'm going to assume Necrons, Tau, and Dark Eldar, because those will all be good mono factions because that's just the way it's been for a very long time. A lot of factions have very glaring weaknesses while some don't. So if you want the factions that have the weaknesses to have a chance, you have to allow them to ally in some other factions that make up for those weaknesses. If you can't do that, then again, the most optimized lists are going to be the ones like Eldar and Astra Militarum. One last thing I want to touch up on before I end this video for why I think this is healthy for the game and the hobby in whole, because people who like mixing and matching can now do so, and Games Workshop will make more money because of this, and in turn will produce more minis and codexes for us. Games Workshop is a company whose goal, like any other company, is to make a profit. If they forced everyone to play one army only, they just ruin their chances of selling bits and pieces from every army to that one person. But now with the way the rules are, people can buy few units from every different army and mix and match them to play around with. For example, if you could only use Celestine in Sister of Battle lists, do you think Games Workshop would have sold nearly as many Celestine models? No way in hell. If you couldn't use Magnus or Mortarion alongside your Chaos armies, do you think those models would have sold as well as they did? No. People might be upset by this and think Games Workshop is only out for money, but yeah, that's part of running a business. If they don't make money, they won't make minis, and you won't have this amazing game to play or collect anymore. I'm not trying to say that they were going out of business or were hurting by any means, because they weren't, at least to my knowledge. But the more money Games Workshop makes, that means the more they will invest into new minis, new codexes, new armies, and just new stuff for the hobby overall. And I, for one, love my new minis and new armies, so I am all for this. I also enjoy being able to play with any model I want and not being forced to buy their whole army just to play them. If I had to buy a whole Sisters of Battle army just because I like the Celestine model, then I just wouldn't bother because that's too big of an investment just for the one model from that army. So that about covers it for this video. So let's give a quick summary. To argue it's not narrative or fluffy to run soup armies, I disagree, because if you're creative enough, you can make any backstory for your army for why it is the way it is. For balance reasons and people that think soup armies are ruining the meta, again, I disagree because soup armies allow many armies and units that would usually not be able to be used in a viable competitive list, because now you can make up for their weaknesses by allying in other armies, and overall can just make a much better list than you would have if you were stuck playing strictly Grey Knights or strictly Blood Angels or strictly Ultramarines. If command points were stuck to the detachment that gained those command points, this would also kill a lot of armies that have a hard time acquiring command points through their own means. So again, no one would ever play Grey Knights, no one would ever play Custodes, no one would ever play Deathwatch. And also, soup armies are good for the game in Games Workshop because it sells a lot of minis. And again, if you had to purchase a whole Sisters army just to play Celestine, then that Celestine model wouldn't have sold nearly as well, and Games Workshop wouldn't have the backing in order to put out as much content as they're doing. Well anyways, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. And if you are already subscribed, but would like to help support the channel even further, you can do so on Patreon. Anyways, I hope this video helped you guys, and I will see you in the next one. Happy wargaming!